Great, let's get started. So thank you for being with us today. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Pierre Petit de Pasquale. I'm the Standards Director at IRMA, and today is one of actually the last live consultation events or feedback webinars that IRMA has been organizing between December last year and January this year to inform the revision process of the IRMA standard for responsible mining. So we've been covering a number of topics, chapters, some sector-specific and other mechanics of the IRMA standard. And today we're focusing on a very important chapter on greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption. So the agenda for today, I'll just briefly take you through the house rules, and then I explain how you can contribute live and direct during this consultation. I will tell you about the revision process itself, and then we will go into the proposed changes for this chapter. So what's new compared to the 2018 version of the IRMA Standard for Responsible Mining and this new draft version that we've put out for public comment. And I'll also I have selected a number of key consultation questions also to get us going and inform the Q&A session that we'll have at the end, depending on time and your needs and demands, of course. So this event is hosted by IRMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. This is being recorded, and the recording will be made publicly available on our website and our YouTube channel. If you have missed any of the other sessions, if you're interested in other topics, chapters, you couldn't attend, you can find them online, watch the replay. I really encourage you to do so if you are interested in. I have to remind you today that you may not post any unlawful, offensive, threatening, libelous, defamatory, obscene, or objectionable content. You may not post or send or link to hateful, degrading, criminal, or sensitive imagery or content, nor advocate or promote intolerance or hate against other people. And I also remind you to not post or send any spam content today. Why am I saying this? Mainly because the chat function is open. It's available there. It's enabled. Everybody can use it, and so this is important that we are, just all on the same page when it comes to rules, what can and cannot be said. So this event represents one of the many channels, spaces, and opportunities that are available for all stakeholders to contribute to the revision of the IRMA standard for responsible mining. That includes a dedicated online platform that you can find at www.responsiblemining.net/commons2, the number 2. I'll say a little bit more about it in a later slide. But for today's purpose, you can use the chat function that I just mentioned. It is open. You can share, any content, questions, remarks, feedback, recommendations, suggestions as well, or any experience that you've had with the current IRMA standard for responsible mining, for example. But please note that the chat cannot be used in an anonymous way, so your name will be visible. Unlike the Q&A function, which is the other feature that you can use today to share, again, any comment, suggestion, feedback, question, concern, recommendation to IRMA, the icon is located at the bottom of your screen, maybe in the top right corner if you're on a mobile phone. And here there's an option that reads send anonymously. You can tick it if you want to submit content in an anonymous way. That's absolutely fine. And all the content that you will share with us today so either via the chat or the Q&A function, will be saved and considered by IRMA as part of the revision process. So it will have exactly the same value as sending us an email or even a formal contribution in a PDF document or using the online platform. Be assured of that. So this revision process itself, in a few words, in a few slides, um, you would know, or you may know, that the IRMA Standard for Responsible Mining is now 5 years old. So it was officially launched in 2018. And so as part of IRMA's continuous improvement, I could say, and ensuring that IRMA also follows and aligns with international best practice when it comes to standard setting. It is necessary that a thorough revision happens at least every 5 years, so it's just the right time. And actually conducting this comprehensive revision, and I also want to say that clearly this revision process is not sort of a one-off isolated event. It's really been 5 years of learning and ongoing thinking, exchange, stakeholder engagement. But doing this comprehensive revision now allows us to ensure the IRMA system and the IRMA standard remain accountable to all sectors, to all stakeholder groups, needs, and expectations, to ensure that the standard remains up to date, that it also that it's clear. So it's an opportunity for us to add clarity where it's needed, where the standard can be clearer, more accessible, also more auditable for auditors, learning from the first audits that have happened. It's also a wonderful opportunity for us to add consistency and make sure the structure of the different chapters that are similar is better aligned, and also to ensure that, and this is quite important in the IRMA standard, that throughout the standard, throughout the chapters, there is a strong and robust articulation of good and sound management systems, practice, and model. So how do we operationalize continuous improvement in practical terms, practical sequences throughout the standard? And then finally, it's a wonderful opportunity for IRMA to fill any gaps. So any issues where the IRMA standard may have fallen behind, for example, over the last 5 years, it's just the perfect time to make sure we bridge these gaps, if any. One important thing about IRMA and this revision process, we are evolving to address and cover more, and to cover more of the key phases along the mineral supply chain. So building on the IRMA standard for responsible mining, the 2018 standard that really focuses on mining operations per se, so where mining happens, and combining it with two standards that are and that were up to now uh, only in the form of drafts, uh, draft standards that were published in 2021, and that do cover mineral exploration and development. So everything that happens before mining, commissioning, and starting a mine. And so that was the IRMA ready draft standard published in 2021 for public comment as well. And also including the draft standard for responsible mineral processing. It was also published in 2021 for public comment, which looks at standalone mineral processing operations and facilities. So any of the sort of ore separation, concentration, transformation, etc. And having realized how the vast majority of the chapters and the requirements in these three standards are actually the same and do touch on the same issues and the same um, problems, we have decided to integrate them, so to unify them into one single standard for responsible mining and mineral processing 2.0. This is the draft standard that we've published in October last year for public comment. What will you find in this new consultation draft if you haven't had a chance to read it? And also if you have, but it wasn't clear. First of all, this is not a final board approved standard. This is a draft, and this is most importantly an invitation to all stakeholders, to everybody really, for comments and reflections on all the content. So not only the requirements per se and the changes that we're proposing in the text of these criteria and requirements, but also on the IRMA approach, the critical requirements, the chapters, the sequence, the mechanics of the IRMA system. To make this easier for you to navigate and understand, we have included a lot of notes. So at the beginning of each chapter, you will find a summary of the changes that are proposed for this chapter. And then under every single requirement, so at requirement level, there are also extensive notes that explain more in detail what the changes are. So how does this compare to the 2018 version of the standard for responsible mining? And also the rationale. So why is IRMA proposing this change? Linking it back to what I mentioned before, whether this is a way for IRMA to make sure this is up to date or this is clearer, or this change actually makes the requirement and the section more consistent, and also any gaps that would have been identified and is now proposed to be closed or bridged. So everything is up for comment, really. So we're really we have been receiving more and more contributions as of recently. Clearly, as we get closer to the deadline for the comments, but we have also pulled out a number of consultation questions. You'll find them in blue text throughout the document, and these consultation questions are really capturing some of the most challenging and sometimes controversial issues or problems that have been raised. And so we are really, hoping and looking forward to reading your comments and suggestion to resolve them. If you are more comfortable with a tabular format, there's an Excel version of the draft standard that you can download on our website. And then finally, the entire draft standard has been translated into Spanish, so that can be downloaded from our website. I'm just going to put the link in the chat right now, and reminding you and inviting you again to use the chat and the Q&A function at any time as I go along. If you have questions, if you have read the draft standards, you have questions, recommendations, in particular on this chapter on greenhouse gas emissions and energy, but also on the whole standard. That's absolutely fine. This new draft, as I said, has been informed by a 5-year-long ongoing process. We have really learned a lot and gained a lot from the initial IRMA audits, so all the independent third-party audits that have been taking place over the last year, the last years. So you would know that we have published already 4 public audit reports, but we've learned more than that. Actually, there are about 16 more that are ongoing, with a number of audit reports that are being finalized right now. I know I just learned yesterday that 2 or 3 are actually about to be finished now, and we're preparing for a publication very soon. So we've learned really from that journey, from the very initial pilots, even before official audits took place. to really learn from the auditors, from the implementing companies, but also from all the stakeholders who were involved. So workers, labor unions, affected communities around the mining operations, and other experts who are involved. We have been reviewing constantly other standards around there that also look at responsible mining, responsible business practice. We've also looked at how, society's expectations, best practice, and best practice have been evolving over the last 5 years. We have taken into account the comments that we received on these two draft standards that I mentioned before. So the IRMA Ready and the mineral processing draft standards were open for public comment for quite some time. And so all the comments we received have been considered. We've benefited from, what I mentioned, this ongoing stakeholder engagement activities at IRMA over the last 5 years, and the work of a number of expert working groups that took place with some of them still being quite active with still some work going to happen in the coming days and weeks. And for this chapter in particular on greenhouse gas emissions and energy, we have also learned from a survey to mining companies that was designed and circulated a couple of years ago. That was part of an initiative called the M3 Standards Partnership. That was a joint project of IRMA, Responsible Steel, the Responsible Jewelry Council, and the Mining Association of Canada. When we were together, different standards, different systems related to responsible mining, looking at climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. So the public consultation period is open. We released this draft at the end of October last year. This is a 90-day comment period. So you still have until the end of January, basically, so next week, to send your contribution recommendations if you haven't done so yet. If you need a little bit more time, don't hesitate. You can, write to us, write to me, and we'll see how we can accommodate that. There are many ways to participate. These live consultations being one of the many, reassuring you again that all the comments will be considered in an equal and objective manner. There are not, some comments that are more important or worth more than others. They will all be taken into account. And we will publish a public summary of all the comments we've received and how we're proposing to respond to them once this is ready. So this is also why it's important. If you want your comments to be treated in an anonymous way, a confidential way, so that we take them into account, but we don't, publish your name, affiliation, please do indicate it when you submit your contribution. So if you're using the online platform, again, you can find it at www.responsibleminer.net/comments2. There's an option there, there's a very clear option. You can tick it if you want your contribution to be anonymized. And here the platform was really designed in a way that allows you to go to every single chapter, every single requirement. You can answer to, only some specific consultation questions if this is what you want to do. And there's a section if you want to send a general high-level comments as well. This is possible. And then we have more traditional channels. So we have a dedicated email address, comments@responsiblemining.net. You can send us your contribution anytime. We'll acknowledge good receipt. And then you can use our WhatsApp line or a physical address alternatively. Now, so this was, to cover the revision process and the rationale also for IRMA to do this revision and why to do it now. We'll dive now into the proposed changes for this chapter on greenhouse gas emissions and energy reduction. So this is not a new chapter. So in the IRMA, in the 2018 version of the standard for responsible mining, there is a chapter already on greenhouse gas emissions. The objectives remain pretty much the same. It's to ensure that companies minimize contribution to climate change impacts through increased energy efficiency, reduced energy consumption, reduced emissions of greenhouse gas from direct and indirect sources, and increased capture of carbon already emitted to the atmosphere. So we've expanded a little bit the sort of general objective, but the intent remains the same. This chapter is potentially applicable to exploration, mining, and mineral processing projects and operations, depending on their stages. I'll be saying a few words about that later on, but to remind you, if this wasn't clear, that this new draft standard is an integrated standard that allows you and everybody to look at the sort of performance and responsible practice of uh, all projects and operations, from the early exploration to project development to the operational mines, as well as standalone mineral processing operations. We're proposing some substantial changes in this chapter when you compare it to the 2018 mining standard. Why are we doing so? It's really for us to bring IRMA up to speed. There's been a lot that has happened around this topic and around climate change in general. And so many stakeholders do feel and indicate that the IRMA standard as it currently is doesn't reflect best practice anymore. And in particular, best practice that you can found in other standards, for example. And indeed, since 2018, so over the last 5 years, I think everybody has witnessed how the critical actions that are needed to limit global warming, to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Climate change is there. How do we address and mitigate the worst parts and impacts? Well, these actions continue to lag behind what is necessary. So there's really a need for rapid action, rapid progress for all sectors, including the mining industry, during the decade to come. And so we really want to promote positive change, and this is why we're proposing to add and strengthen the requirements throughout this chapter. So that is really the starting point, acknowledging a number of gaps, limitations in the 2018 version of the standard to take action and bring it up to speed. So as an overview or a summary of the changes that we're proposing, and again, you will find all the details in the draft standard, but in a nutshell, we're proposing to add new requirements that relate to design consideration. So from the very early design stage, how can a company, an operator, embed energy efficiency, minimize the energy consumption and the emission of greenhouse gas emissions? So that's one new requirement that you will find. We are also proposing a requirement that require the company to have targets in place that relate to the use of renewable energy. So these are already some, gaps and ways for us to remain up to date. Another way for us to remain up to date is to have requirements on targets that do cover both absolute and intensity targets for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, rather than leaving a choice, or in many cases, companies have been only setting or disclosing intensity targets, but the two provide different type of information that is important and valuable. We're proposing you'll see that we've added new requirements, time-bound requirements to calculate upstream Scope 3 emissions, and then potentially establish targets for reducing them depending on what those estimates are. And similarly, time-bound requirements to calculate and report downstream Scope 3 emissions. So the upstream Scope 3 emissions is clearly everything that is happening, upstream, your uh, service providers, goods providers, your own supply chain. And then the downstream scope 3 emissions are actually around uh, the sort of the subsequent life cycle of the metals and minerals that you're extracting. For scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, we have included a requirement that require third-party verification of calculations. Again, this is, one way for us to remain up to date, fill a number of gaps that we have identified. We're also proposing a number of changes to be more consistent with the rest of the standard. So we have expanded the requirements around the management plans to better align with the other chapters. There is, in particular, requirements around monitoring and evaluation. So evaluating the effectiveness, the performance of the reduction strategies against the targets that have been set to be consistent. And it's clearly one of the best way to operationalize continuous improvement, because if you don't measure and if you don't measure against targets, it's really hard to know how you're doing, and it's really hard to know what's needed to improve and if you're improving at all. Carbon offsets remain quite a challenging and sometimes controversial elements of the response to climate change. So what we have done is we've added requirements that uh, require that the carbon losses from land use changes must be included in the calculation of emissions, first of all. And then when there are, carbon offsets being used, we've also increased the requirements around reporting, disclosure, public disclosure, and that include the calculation method. So being more transparent about the actual estimate, the methodologies, the rationale, and the actions taken when it comes to carbon offsets. Also to try prevent, the risk of greenwashing. So this is in a nutshell the sort of various key changes that we're proposing to strengthen this chapter. And I have a few more slides that I wanted to share with you. Again, reminding you that you can use the chat Q&A anytime as I go along if you have, questions or feedback to share with us. I've mentioned now a couple of times that the new draft standard do cover not only mining operations, but also exploration, development, and standalone mineral processing. One document and additional guidance that we have also made available and prepared and published is an applicability handbook. I'm just putting the the link in the chat right now. And this is actually two documents, one Excel spreadsheet and then a sort of a text form handbook. And this gives you explanation and clarification for every single requirement, how this can be applicable to these different phases of the development and the mineral supply chain. This is also a document that is open for public comment. It includes a number of, consultation questions, things that we would, love to have your feedback. In particular, if you are an operator or a stakeholder affected by exploration projects and also standalone mineral processing, where some piloting has been ongoing at IRMA with a number of companies being engaged in the IRMA system for a number of years now. But it's just, we can never get enough feedback from the sort of first-hand experience in dealing with these issues. So you see here at the top, we've got exploration stage 1, which is the sort of very early desk-based exploration, absolutely no on-the-ground work, field work. Then you go to the next stages, stage 2, stage 3, and then to the project development process, the project permitting, and then operational mines or mineral processing operations there. And you see how gradually, there are more and more requirements that can be that become applicable. Again, we're open to, comments around. I'm thinking particular exploration stage 3, so where there's already quite some, work and activities taking place on the ground. There might be some, very early facilities or construction work happening at a small scale. But again, any feedback on how these different requirements may be or not applicable is welcome. And this document I think, is really key, in particular for companies that are willing to, implement the IRMA standard and join the IRMA system, to really navigate the standard and understand the sort of volume of work, efforts, what kind of requirements are applicable to their own context. So now when you compare this new version of the chapter to the 2018 version, so the current standard for responsible mining, we are moving from only 7 requirements in the 2018 standard to 17 requirements in the 2023 standards. So here you see, again, as an overview, adding greenhouse gas emission and energy considerations in the selection of technology and methods from the very early design stage, clearly bridging the gap around scope 3 emissions, which was still I think, a very uh, not problematic, but it was more a controversial issue, and before 2018, and not all stakeholder groups were. I mean, some stakeholders were still arguing about it, about the feasibility, the relevance, etc. We've seen how, the world has changed, and it's really become an imperative, which is great. So it was important to make sure we covered it. We've added a number of requirements on energy, so energy consumption, energy efficiency, that are also not in the 2018 standard. I've mentioned it, if carbon offsets are used, there's a need for, explaining, demonstrating the rationale, the calculation. Also, any interaction with indigenous peoples, indigenous rights holders, if this is relevant, and demonstrating that, the company has obtained the free, prior, and informed consent, particularly if their lands are being used. And then management, monitoring, and public reporting requirements. And yes, I see that there's a question, does the IRMA standard only require the calculation of emissions, or also require the public disclosure of that data? And do you provide any guidance on how that disclosure should happen? There are actually requirements that require all companies to publicly share, publicly disclose uh, the calculations, but also the methodologies that have been used. So at the moment, there are not prescriptive methodologies or guidance on one way that would be the way to calculate. And I'm thinking particularly of scope 3 emissions. But what's required is transparency on the methodology that has been used. Again, there are other ways to do it, and it's true that on a number of chapters we do provide guidance and annexes on sort of the way to go, and a comprehensive list of methodology, best practice. I'm thinking of a few things that we discussed this week around the management of physical stability of infrastructure, tailings dams management, waste management. We have the water quality tables, etc. So if you have comments, recommendations, if you think this is not the right approach, to not be prescriptive when it comes to the methodologies and calculations, please let us know. And I mentioned it in the introduction, we have these consultation questions throughout the document that we've highlighted, and that we would really love to, hear from you, your thought, your recommendations, your answers. I've selected a few to share with you now, to give you an idea of, what they are. what is it that we are asking specifically, if and also to yeah, I guess, give you an opportunity to reflect, think about it. If you haven't had a chance to see them, as I said, you still have time if you want to send your comments and contributions to IRMA. Well, first of all, there are significant changes. It's one of these chapters, one of the few chapters I think where there are really substantial changes with, brand new requirements, filling a number of gaps. So any comments on the new approach, but also at the level of individual requirements, would be greatly appreciated. So if you agree, if you don't agree, why do you agree? Why do you disagree? And what are your recommendations to improve? Really, that's really what we would love to see. So a few, and I see that there's another question coming in. So I'll just read them out. Which greenhouse gas emissions are included in the IRMA standards? Um, have you considered a risk of double counting Scope 3 GHG emissions? Have you included expectations on the standards that should be used to calculate GHG emissions? And given that GHG emissions avoidance and reduction might require large capital investments that individual mine sites might not be able to bring up, are there requirements to anchor site-level GHG emissions in the corporate owner's strategy and to have corporate owner top-level management accountability? Thanks for asking and sharing. I think these are all um, very important points. So the GHG emissions that are included, I think I mentioned it before, but we have the scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions. So that's really what's happening on site. So the own scope 1, the direct emissions, greenhouse gas being emitted by the site uh, because of the operations taking place. The scope 2 emissions being all the energy that's required for the sites to be operational. And then scope 3 emissions. And we have here requirements to estimate upstream GHG emissions. So as I said, suppliers of goods, of services. If we're talking about mineral processing, clearly that would also include the supply of the minerals. And then the downstream emissions. So again, if we're talking about a mine site, producing pre-concentrate, for example, how this is going into the processing processes and the potential emissions happening there. So have you considered the risk of double counting? I think the very important question is here is the risk to whom? Um, because indeed, with this model where, asking a particular mine to calculate the scope 3 downstream emissions, while at the same time potentially having, one of their customers in the same supply chain that is actually buying this pre-concentrate and asking them if they are in the IRMA system to calculate their own scope 3 upstream emissions, then there will be potentially double counting. What is important here, I think, is that this would offer ultimately, if all operations and sites were to do that, also open an opportunity for everybody to reconciliate the numbers and see, what is this mine reporting and calculating, matching what these downstream processors and operators reporting. Uh, I think ultimately to have a more robust and accurate picture of the contribution of the sector, and then there'll be clearly added work needed to find the sort of absolute figure, but I think this is one of the big problem at the moment. And in many sectors, we've seen how, this risk of double counting has been often used as I think a way to slow the process down. Expectational standards should be used to calculate greenhouse gas emissions. So again, we don't have a prescriptive methodology, but yes, we do have. I see there's another question. about the potential greenhouse gas emission. So both in the definition and the list of gas that need to be included. Again, any comments on that is they're welcome. And your question, very good question on how can there be potentially mutualization of cost at the sort of parent company level. So if we're thinking of a parent company owning multiple sites, um, I guess this would probably be the practical way to go for a number of companies. We don't have such requirements here. Again, this is not prescriptive. And how the sort of corporate level, parent company level should be, accountable to ensuring that there are investments being made to avoid and reduce greenhouse emissions, in particular from the sort of design and early stages. So that's something we could explore. If you have, recommendation, suggestions, also that would be very welcome. I'm just gonna try look at the sort of definition, see if we have because in the 2018 standard there was really this requirement that allowed companies, if they wanted to only report at corporate level, not at site level. So this has really been strengthened. There's still some provisions on, reporting data at the corporate level as well, but always with the need to have the site level calculation and emissions. Um, Looking at the greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, I think we could strengthen some of these annexes. So again, I mean, all these comments are being, taken into account. If you have more that you want to share with us, recommendation, examples, best practice, things that you've seen working out there in standards or in companies doing things, that's really welcome. I'll just use again, if you have more questions, please send them through to the chat or the Q&A. I'll just be sharing some more consultation questions from the drafts, just for you to know and have an idea of what they are. We are proposing a target related to the use of renewable energy. So that's one sub requirement under 4.5.2.1. Acknowledging that, a deep reduction in the burning of fossil fuels must be part of any company strategy if we are to limit the effects of climate change. So regardless of the sector and jurisdiction, but we recognize that in some locations, there may be limited options for buying renewable energy source from external parties, so shifting from fossil fuel powered energy or electricity, for example, to renewables might be complicated or impossible. The hypothesis here is that there should be always opportunity for a site to produce and install its own energy facilities from solar, wind, water, for example. And if this on that basis that IRMA consider it is reasonable to have some sort of targets on the use of renewable energy. But this is also, this is an open question, and there are reasons and cases to be made to disagree with that. And so, if you disagree, if you don't think this is reasonable, realistic, and sort of universal enough to have a requirement on a renewable energy target, would be, very happy to, hear your arguments and see if this should be changed or addressed differently. When it comes to calculating the emissions, so there's always Still, I think this tension and conundrum around calculating and estimating the emissions versus measuring them. Uh, so are you aware of, trends in use of direct measurements? Again, for particular greenhouse gas emissions, we are very much aware that, some of them cannot be, or it's very difficult to measure them. There's been a lot of sort of work and evolution around, satellite data, space monitoring, etc. But, we didn't have, I think, the confidence or enough elements to be more prescriptive around direct measurement. So if you are aware, if you have information, if you'd like to share more with us, about the methods, how successful they are, but also the limitations, we would love to, learn more about it and see again how it can or cannot be integrated in the standard. When it comes to targets, I've seen it, earlier that it's one of the area where we're also proposing to strengthen the standard. We are requiring quantitative, time-bound, short-term, medium-term, and long-term site-based targets on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And targets set by corporate owners. So this is, I think, back to, the point that was raised before. So at the corporate level, we have prescription on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions only to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in absolute and intensity terms, and showing that these targets are aligned with the Paris Agreement. First of all, do you agree that, this is a good thing to have both absolutes and intensity targets required? And if you agree that, this is the right approach, what would realistic targets and timeframes be for each measure, and how should they be linked? So between absolutes and intensity targets. When it comes to upstream Scope 3, so this is where, we are really focusing on site level emissions and targets. What we're requiring for the upstream, so the suppliers of goods, services, potentially suppliers of minerals, if we're talking about a processing operation, we require a commitment to calculate and a commitment to publicly report these emissions. And then if these emissions represent more than 40% of a site's total emissions, there's a requirement to then establish quantitative, time-bound, short-term, medium-term, and long-term targets, here only at the site level, to reduce the Scope 3 emissions. Again, ensuring that these targets align with the Paris Agreement. Do you think this is an appropriate, balance and a good compromise between driving progress on Scope 3 emissions, which is clearly, and when we talk about mining, the sort of largest, greatest area that needs, I think, attention in terms of, volumes and amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. So finding a compromise between, driving progress and promoting, continuous improvement and actions, while at the same time creating space for sites to work within a reasonable time frame. So not expect that, sites overnight are going to dramatically reduce or cut their upstream Scope 3 emissions. Again, any thoughts on that, on the approach, we're proposing? So having the commitment, then the disclosure, and then depending on the proportion or the ratio that there are, actions and targets being set. When it comes to public data reporting, public data sharing, also back to, that point that was raised in the Q&A. There's also a requirement that the management plans are made publicly available. So not only the calculation, the figures, and the methodologies, but also the management plans. Do you support this proposal? Do you think this is, going too far? Do you think this is interesting, meaningful to stakeholders? And then when it comes to the actual prescriptive items and elements that need to be included in the data sharing. And we require, total energy consumption, disaggregated energy consumption by sources, the total energy intensity, GHG emissions, scope 1, scope 2, absolute and intensity, the estimate of scope 3 emissions by category, reporting on the progress versus the targets for scope 1, scope 2, and as we mentioned before, if there was this requirement to have a target on scope 3 emissions, also to report on the progress, energy reduction, renewable targets, and then also reporting and sharing data on the corrective actions that are being taken, so the whole management plans and the progress towards the full implementation of these actions and the management plan. And finally, if carbon offsets are being used, also publicly sharing the data on the percentage of GHG emission reductions that is achieved through carbon offsetting to be, very clear and transparent. Do you support this approach? So this is really, adding quite a lot of elements and items compared to the 2018 version when it comes to greenhouse gas and energy data. And if you don't think this is the right thing to do, what would you change? Would you add more? Would you cut some elements, some items? Again, very open and eager to hear from you on these points. I'll stop here with the selection of consultation questions. Again, you can find more in the document itself. And I want to remind you that, there's still 1 week for you to send your contributions, comments. Thanks for having participated in this or more of the live consultation events. This has been, very helpful. And, in most sessions, we heard from some of the participants, some we actually heard a lot. And so it's been very, I think, helpful for IRMA to have these added perspectives. If you need a little bit more time, if next week is too complicated for you to send your contribution before, again, don't hesitate. You can write to comments@responsibleminding.net, or you can write to me directly, and we'll see how we can accommodate. I think we've addressed all the sort of comments and clarifications here today. So I'll just, thank you all again for joining me this morning. I hope this was informative and clear. If you have questions, if you need, more time, if you'd like to also set up a call with me, with other on the IRMA team, this is always possible. We're here to, really serve and assist you with anything that relates to the IRMA system in general and the IRMA standard in particular right now. So thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. Take care. Thank you.